So let's talk about something that sounds simple, but is actually really quite tricky when you start to think about it, which is rules. Now, following rules seems straightforward, right? You follow the instructions, you apply them, and you expect consistent results. But here's the catch. How do you really know that you're following a rule correctly? That's the question that Saul Kripke poses when he tackles Wittgenstein's famous rule-following paradox. So Wittgenstein, in his later philosophy, pointed out a seemingly innocent problem. So imagine you're learning a basic rule, like how to add two numbers together. You've been doing it your whole life. 2 plus 2 equals 4. 7 plus 5 equals 12, and so on. But here's the mind bender, as it were. How do you know that every time you're adding numbers, you're actually following the rule for addition and not some other rule that just happens to look like addition? And this is where Kripke's famous example comes in. So he asks you to consider this. Suppose there's a different rule, which he calls Quaddition, where everything works exactly like regular addition for numbers smaller than 57. But once you hit 57 or more, Quaddition gives you a completely different result. Let's just say that you get the number 5 no matter what. So you think you've been doing addition your whole life, but how do you prove you weren't actually following the Quaddition rule without realising it? Now I realise at first this sounds silly. Of course I've been adding, you might say. But Kripke's point is that nothing about your past behaviour can definitively show that you meant addition instead of quaddition. Even if you've always gotten the right answer for numbers smaller than 57, that behaviour fits both addition and quaddition. So which rule were you actually following? And this is the core of Wittgenstein's paradox. Every rule can be interpreted in an infinite number of ways, and no fact about your past can guarantee that you are following one specific rule rather than another. And this leads us to an unsettling conclusion. I mean, at least it feels unsettling at first. There is no fact inside your head or in your behaviour that definitively settles the matter. Nothing internal you can point to can prove that you were following the rules of addition rather than quaddition. Think about it. Even if you have a strong conviction in your mind that you meant to follow addition, how do you prove that your intention aligns with the rule for addition and not something else? So what do we do with this? Do we just throw up our hands and say, well, I guess meaning is impossible? Well, not quite. So this is where Kripke brings in Wittgenstein's skeptical solution. Instead of trying to find some metaphysical fact about your mind or behaviour that determines the rule you're following, Kripke argues that Wittgenstein wants us to look outside ourselves, to the community. So here's the solution. Meaning isn't something that lives privately inside your mind. Meaning, instead, is a social phenomenon. The reason that you know that plus means addition and not quaddition isn't because of anything going on inside your brain. It's because you're part of a community that has agreed on how to use plus. When you add numbers together, you're doing it in a way that conforms to shared practices and norms of your society. Think about when you first learned mathematics. You didn't invent addition on your own. You were taught it by teachers, books and parents, people who were already embedded in the community of mathematics. If you suddenly started using quaddition, where 57 plus 3 equals 5, everyone around you would correct you, not because they know what's in your head, but because you're violating the shared understanding of what addition means. In this sense, meaning is public, not private. It's rooted in the practices of a community, and that's where the correctness of rule following comes from. It's not that you privately decide whether you're following a rule for addition or quaddition. It's that the community of mathematicians, or society in general, determines the standard for what counts as correct or incorrect usage. If your behaviour diverges from that, you're not following the rule anymore, according to the community. So let's take a different example. Say a game like chess. Imagine every time you moved the knight, you started moving it like a rook. When someone calls you out, you say, no, in my version of chess, the knight moves this way. Now that might make sense in your head, but to everybody else, you simply aren't playing chess anymore. The rules of chess aren't something that live inside your mind. They're established by a shared agreement of everyone who plays the game. That's what makes a rule a rule. It's something that can be publicly checked and agreed upon. Wittgenstein's point, as Kripke sees it, is that all meaning works this way. The meaning of a word like dog isn't determined by some like mental image or definition you have in your head. It's determined by how we as a community use the word dog in our everyday lives. If you started using dog to refer to cats, the community would step in and say, that's not a dog. Or they would say, that's not what dog means. And they would say that because the meaning of dog is grounded in our shared practices, not in any one private understanding. So this ties quite succinctly and directly into Wittgenstein's incredibly famous private language argument. He argues that a private language where words mean something only to you in a way that no one else could understand is impossible. Why? Because language and meaning depend on rules, and rules, as we've seen, can only exist in a public space, where they can be checked, followed, and corrected by others. If no one else can understand or verify your rule, it's not really a rule at all. Now, this isn't just an abstract point about mathematics or games. It applies to everything we do with language and meaning. Imagine you've got a secret diary where you write down your private sensations. You use a symbol to stand for a particular feeling, a symbol nobody else knows. But how do you know that you're using the symbol the same way each time? Without any external check, you could be wildly inconsistent without even realizing it, and no one could correct you. And that's why Wittgenstein says that private rules, and by extension private meaning, don't make sense. This also means that meaning isn't fixed or like eternal. It evolves with the community. Take the English language, for example. The meaning of words change over time as people use them differently. One day a word means happy, the next it might mean angry, because that's how people started using it. Meaning is a living practice shaped by how we collectively use language over time. So in the end, Kripke's interpretation of Wittgenstein, or Kripkenstein as it's often called, tells us something profound about meaning, language and rules. It's not that there's some hidden essence of meaning inside our heads. Meaning isn't an individual private matter. Instead, it's a social practice. It's the result of shared agreements, communal corrections and public norms. When we ask whether we're following a rule correctly, the answer isn't inside us. It's out there, in the community, in the way we interact, communicate and agree on how words and rules should function. It's a radical shift in how we think about meaning, and it forces us to reconsider the role that community plays in everything we do with language. Meaning isn't something that's given once and for all. It's something we create, maintain and reshape together. Now I want you to think about the way that you personally use language and how that differs from other people. So we all have like words that we sort of apply to things that really are only for us, or for a very sort of small number of people around us. So think about how you use those words. Slang is a great example of that, right? So slang is the sort of informal manipulation of language in a sense, right? So you got a bunch of people come together and they start using that particular word in a particular way. Now, outside of that community, that word means something else entirely. But within that community, it's taken on that new meaning. And as the scope of that community increases, so too does the scope of that meaning. The way that meaning is understood by people also, scales up. So have a think about words that you use that potentially have different meanings depending on the communities in which you're using them. Another good example is scientific language. So there are words that we use in everyday language that we use in scientific language. But the function of those words, the meaning of those words, is different in each of those particular communities. So there's lots to think about with this, and it applies to all thought, to all communication. And it is a fascinating thing to think about, because if you think about it, there's a lot of scope for misunderstanding in language. It is, and I don't like to use the term, but I'm going to anyway, it is almost a miracle that we are actually able to communicate with one another in such a way that actually transmits meaning in the way that we do. So the fact that we've been able to come together and create these rules just through those interactions without explicitly setting those rules is nothing short of miraculous and fascinating too. So yeah, that's the Kripkenstein, as they call it. That is Saul Kripke on Wittgenstein's rule-following paradox. Now, Saul Kripke has had an enormous impact on philosophy. So if you are interested at all, I highly recommend you go and examine some of the ideas of Saul Kripke. He really was or is a revolutionary thinker. So that's it for today. Before I go, I just want to ask if you wouldn't mind doing the YouTube stuff, like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notifications and all of that good stuff. That means when you do that YouTube will show you more of my videos, but it will also show you more videos from other people on similar subjects. So it's a benefit to everybody, in my opinion. But there's no pressure. You do as you please. So thank you for listening anyway. I hope you found it interesting and informative. And if you have any questions, then jump in the comments and fire away, and I'll do my best to answer them. And if you think I've misunderstood anything or I've said something that's just plain wrong, again, jump in the comments and let me know, because that's how we all benefit. We all benefit from that sharing of knowledge, and if we do not correct one another, we could be running with what we think is knowledge and is actually nonsense. So if you think I'm wrong, come and tell me, because as much as I'm here to share information, I'm also here to learn too. But yeah, so I'm going to go now because now I'm just waffling. So thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.